government and by extension taxpayers, recent proposals that have been made by the university for an increase in tuition fees, the government's response to that, and a general overview of our thinking with respect to the University of the West Indies. So I'll just give a broad overview, and then I will hand over to the Minister of Education to provide some further details. Now, the way the university is structured, the university has a number of committees. One of the primary committees at the university is the University Grants Committee. The acronym for that is UGC. The University Grants Committee normally meets once per year. The chairmanship of the University Grants Committee is rotated among the campus territories. So actually until this year, when the campus in Antigua was recognized as a full-fledged campus of the University of the West Indies, the three campuses would have been St. Augustine, Cave Hill, Barbados, and Mona, Jamaica, so that the practice at the University Grants Committee is that the Minister of Finance from the campus territory in rotation among those three chairs the University Grants Committee. I have been the chairman of the University Grants Committee for the last 3 years because it became Trinidad and Tobago's campus turn to chair the committee. So by virtue of the fact that I am Minister of Finance in Trinidad and Tobago, and by virtue of the fact that it became the turn of the St. Augustine campus of Trinidad and Tobago to chair that committee, I became the chairman, and I've chaired it for the last 3 years. The purpose and the role and function of that committee is to review the budget proposals of all the campuses of the university. So this would be St. Augustine, Cave Hill, Mona, the open campus, and now I believe the Antigua campus is called the Five Islands campus. And each one of these entities will make a presentation. St. Augustine campus will make a presentation to the University Grants Committee. Mona campus will make a presentation. Cave Hill campus will make a presentation. As I said, the new campus, Five Islands in Antigua, will make a presentation, and the open campus will make a presentation. The open campus is the distance learning element of UWI. In addition, there's another entity called the University Center, because when the university was established so many years ago, I think it's 1960 or thereabouts, so you're talking over 60 years ago, when UWI was established, it was centered at Mona, Jamaica, and the headquarters, if you want to call it that, is in Mona, Jamaica. So there's an entity in Jamaica called the University Center, which provides the overall and overarching administration for the University of the West Indies in all the territories. So there's a budget for the center as well, because that is where the Vice Chancellor resides. That's where the university registrar, the overall university registrar, the overall university bursar, and other elements of the university administration, they reside in Jamaica. So there's a cost associated with that as well. And each territory is asked to contribute part of the running cost of that center in Mona, Jamaica. So at these University Grants Committee meetings, each campus will make its proposals, each entity will make its proposals, so as I said, open campus, university center, etc. And then the members of the committee, which, as I said, I chaired it, the Minister of Education from Trinidad and Tobago is a member, so that the Minister of Education from all the territories is also a member of that committee. The meeting will come to a conclusion as to exactly how much money each government will contribute towards the running of the campus in their island, or how much they will contribute towards the open campus, or how much they will contribute to the university center, the administrative headquarters in Jamaica, and so on. these matters are discussed and decisions are taken. Quite often, as has happened in the last 3 years that I have chaired, because of the financial difficulties associated with COVID in particular, quite often in these meetings, the campuses will reserve their position. In other words, they're not in a position at the meeting of the University Grants Committee to give a clear commitment as to how much money they could spend. And what has been happening over the last 3 years is that Barbados and Jamaica have been cutting back in terms of the amount of money that they have available to them to spend. We have been faced with a challenge with the St. Augustine campus continuing to ask us for large sums of money. Before I came here, I just double-checked how much money we spend. We spend somewhere in the vicinity of $500 million a year as a country, Trinidad and Tobago. That's our direct contribution to the university. And then you have to add gate funding to that. And I would say at least $200 million in addition to that 500 is spent on tuition, on gate. So you're talking $700 million. It could be more. I'm using round numbers and I'm being conservative. You're talking $700 million thereabouts that the country, Trinidad and Tobago, spends on the university every single year. But because of the problems with COVID, because of all the other financial challenges that we have, and I mean some of those financial challenges have been in the news recently, we have many demands for allocation of funds. We have had to limit the St. Augustine campus to a particular sum of money in terms of how much out of the national budget we can allocate towards expenditure on the combined direct contribution and gate. And what we have found is that the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus has found it difficult to live within the budget that we have given to them. One of the problems is the current enrollment of UII St. Augustine, for example, is in excess of 16,000 students. So that's a big university. I mean, I can go way back in time to when I was a student in the 70s. The enrollment was 3,000. So now it's 17,000. So that, I mean, UE has definitely grown. And certainly GATE has contributed to that. Because when we introduced government assistance for tuition expenses, because that's what the acronym GATE means, back in 2004, when I was actually the minister in charge of tertiary education, I am the one who was responsible for the introduction of GATE. When we introduced that, the intention was to take the enrollment in tertiary education from the figure it was then, which was somewhere around 12% or so, to 60%. That was our target, that 60% of students moving out of secondary education into tertiary education of all types would be enrolled in tertiary education. So at the time in 2004, it was about 12%, maybe a little more. And our target for at that time, we were looking at, you know, what obtains in developed countries and so on. And our target was 60%. We reached that target sometime in 2009. So that Trinidad and Tobago attained the 60% target for enrollment in tertiary education somewhere around the end of 2009. But the university has kept growing so that the enrollment now is far more than it used to be. And I'm only talking UE. So 17,000 students or 16,000 in UE is just part of the enrollment. You also have all the private tertiary level institutions. You have University of Trinidad and Tobago, etc. So when you add that all together, you might get up to 30,000, possibly. Okay? So that the enrollment of our students in tertiary education has grown exponentially since the introduction of GATE, because GATE made it possible for anybody who qualified to go on to tertiary education to access university education. But we're in different times now, so that we have to limit the amount of money that we give to the university, and also limit the amount of money that we could afford to spend on GATE. And the university's reaction to our limits was to make a proposal to increase tuition fees. So they felt that that was the solution. We have a different view. We discovered that UWI St. Augustine has over 300 different course offerings. 300. And certainly when GATE was initiated 18 years ago, UWI St. Augustine did not have 300 course offerings. So you have a vast array of different courses in different disciplines, different programs, and you have 17,000 students. So we are of the view that the University of the West Indies needs to look at the courses that they want the government and the country to pay for. We're not going to tell them what courses to put on, but we believe that they need to look at all these courses that they're offering and decide which ones the government should pay for. That's our response to their proposal that they increase tuition fees, because we think that that increase in tuition fees should be a last resort. UWI has to look within first and see whether they have not overextended themselves, because the cost to the state is directly proportional to the number of students and the number of courses that are being offered. So the more students you have and the more courses you offer, the higher your costs go up. So that we had a committee comprised of ministers. The ministers on the committee comprised myself. It was chaired by, actually, a committee of members of parliament. It was chaired by the MP for Port of Spain South, Mr. Scotland. I was on the committee. Minister Robinson Regis, and of course the Minister of Education was on the committee. We looked at UWI's proposal to increase tuition fees. We met with the outgoing principal, Dr. Copeland, and the incoming principal, Dr. Bellantoine, and they made their proposals to us, and our position to them is that they need to take a look at the size of their enrollment and the number of course offerings to see whether, you know, that is the reason why their costs are so high. I'll now hand it over to the Minister of Education to give some more details.
So I'm just going to go through the chronology of the fee increase proposal and the deliberations of the committee and what we would have considered in coming up with the recommendation that fees not be increased for academic year 2022-23. The issue of the fee increase at St. Augustine campus was first raised on March 5, 2022, where that the Office of the Campus Principal proposed that increase for 2022-23, and it was based on the fact that in the initial arrangements at the university, it was determined that governments would cover 80% of the tuition costs through their direct contribution to the university, and students would cover 20%. In our current circumstance, based on our direct subvention to the university in Trinidad and Tobago to the St. Augustine campus, the government covers 82% of that tuition cost and the student only covers 13%. So the three main reasons advanced by the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus with respect of the fee increase would have been: one, the reduction of the government subvention by 10% in this academic year, and the Minister of Finance would have alluded to the circumstances that would have precipitated that result. Also, fee increases at UWI St. Augustine campus have not increased for 21 years. And this is very different from the other campuses. Mona and Cave Hill, they've all increased their fees over the years in line with inflation, and their students contribute 20%, whereas in Trinidad and Tobago, all students contribute 13%. So the situation is that St. Augustine's fees are the lowest in the region, and of course, very competitive globally. GATE typically covers our student tuition fees, and of course, just a reminder of the GATE tiers: under 10,000 monthly household income, that's 100% GATE the student can qualify for. If it's between 10% and lower than 10,000 and lower than 30,000, 75% GATE. And if there's a monthly household income of 30,000 and less than 75,000, you presently qualify for 50% GATE coverage. Now, subsequent to the meeting, held on March 5th, the Ministry of Education met on April 28th with the St. Augustine Campus Executive and the members of the Student Guild, the president. And we met to discuss this whole matter of the tuition fee proposal. And the Guild would have presented certain concerns regarding this increase of tuition. One was that the consultation they found was not sufficient with the Guild. They found that the increase was too sharp, and they also wanted clarification on whether the increase in tuition would be covered by an increase in gate, so that it would cover all of the increase that was proposed. And also, as a part of the proposal, the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus provided some information on self-funding options, bursaries, increase in bursaries, and so on. And the Guild wanted more information and final concrete information on those options. The Guild also made some recommendations that the fee increase be contemplated for 23-24. That's not this academic year, but the next one. And that during 22-23, this academic year, we look at further consultation with the Guild, looked at the impact analysis, and then based on all of that information, very similar to what the Minister of Finance and the committee would have determined, we look at that fee increase be done based on that information for the next academic year. So on the 9th of May 2022, the Honourable Prime Minister appointed a committee, as explained by the Minister of Finance, comprising Keith Scotland, the Honourable Keith Scotland as the chairman, and the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Housing and Urban Development, as well as myself, the Minister of Education, to meet with the campus executive and the Guild to discuss this matter. That meeting was held on Friday, 13th of May 2022, and we listened to the representations, the oral representations, as well as we were privy to the written submissions of both the Guild as well as the campus executive. So there were 4 issues we looked at: whether we would support a fee increase for this academic year coming, 2022-23, whether that would be covered by gate, whether the government could afford to increase its subvention to UE in lieu of a fee increase. So we considered all of that, and of course the fact that fees had not gone up at UE St. Augustine campus for 21 years. In considering all of that, the major consideration was the impact of a tuition fee increase in short order, because that would mean that for September 2022, students would be asked to pay more for enrollment at UE. And the fee increases proposed range from 25% to 71%, depending on the faculty. So it was not across the board. There were different percentages suggested for different faculties. So in looking at all of the information presented, the committee recommended that the St. Augustine campus do an in-depth cost-benefit analysis and a course efficacy analysis, looking at all the courses they offer, looking at the enrollment, and considering how we can possibly reduce where it is possible. So that information has been requested of the University of the West Indies. Some have been supplied, some information has been supplied, and so we will be compiling all of that to take a closer look at it as we go forward during this academic year. So to sum it up, as the Minister of Finance would have indicated, the government therefore did not support a fee increase at UE St. Augustine for this academic year 2022-23, but we will consider all of the information that is submitted and then come to a conclusion with the collaboration with the Guild. We will come to that conclusion with respect to years following 2022-2023. Thank you.
Floor is open for questions.
So I'll go first. Good afternoon, Jesse Ramdev, CNC3. Either yourself, Minister Imbit, or Dr. Gatsby Dolly can take this one, right? Minister mentioned that over 300 courses are being offered by the institution at this point in time, and that perhaps can be burdening the government and its funding, etc., right? Is there a ballpark figure that you guys are working with in terms of courses to be slashed that might be something that you can consider, whether the courses being slashed by 10%, 30%. Is there a figure that you guys are working with at this point in time?
What we have done is told the university how much money we can spend. We're not going to dictate to them what their courses should be. The question is what courses the government should support, so the ball is back in their court. We're not going to tell them what to do.
And of course, it would depend very heavily on the enrollment in the course. There are some emerging areas that the university may have small enrollment in, but based on the Sustainable Development Goals, they may want to promote these courses, and they may want to grandfather out some other ones. So it really depends on the university. That's why we cannot dictate a 10%. But, we say, okay, we have this. What are the best options that you can use to cut your cloth, as they say, cut your suit to fit your cloth?
I know the dialogue is still ongoing. Has it come up in terms of whether or not there will be any adjustment to the GATE program at this point in time?
That is actually under discussion right now. As I indicated, I was the one who initiated GATE, well, as a member of the government, of course, 2004, so that is 18 years ago. And the intention then was, and you see in those days, we didn't have the financial challenges that we have now. I can't tell you what the government's budget was, but it might have been about $30 billion in 2004. So it was half what it is now. The expenditure of the government was probably half what it was now. And then you had Atlantic LNG coming on stream just around that time. I distinctly remember as we got into 2005, 2006, so on, oil went to $150 a barrel. Gas was $13 a MMBTU. And the production was also very, very much more in terms of oil and gas than it was now. So the country did not have the financial challenges then that it has now. In fact, I can remember something kind of unbelievable. One of those years, I think it was 2006, it might be 2007, we actually ran a budget surplus. These days we run a budget deficit, which means we spend more than we earn in terms of revenue. And we've been running huge budget deficits because of COVID, 13 billion, 15 billion, all that sort of thing. And we ran a huge budget deficit in 2016 when oil price dropped to $25. But in that time, 2006, 2007, we ran a budget surplus of $11 billion. So if you could imagine that, the whole concept of the government going into its overdraft was unheard of. That only actually began around 2012, 2013, the government going from a credit position, which it was in 2010, there was about $6 billion in credit at the central bank in the government's account, and then it went to zero and then started to go into overdraft in 2013 and so on. So when GATE was conceptualized and the projection for revenue for the country at that time was far more, the expenditure was far less. At that time, there was no expectation that government revenue would grow, government expenditure, let me make that clear. There was no expectation in 2004 that government expenditure would grow from 30 billion to 60 billion. That wasn't in anybody's mind. So that the view was that you could afford the GATE system, because I remember many discussions about GATE then. Should we limit it only to the public sector? We said no. Any accredited tertiary education institution, if a student goes to an accredited school and in an accredited program, they should be eligible for GATE. So we then had to develop the accreditation council to achieve that. Then the other question was, should there be an income ceiling in terms of should you limit the income, household income for access to GATE? Again, we said no, because we wanted to build the intellectual capacity and the professional capacity of the country. So when GATE started out, there were no limitations. Once you are doing an accredited program, both undergrad and postgrad, in an accredited institution, whatever your age was, whatever your situation was, you were eligible for GATE. But that was 18 years ago. We never thought we would get to this point, and we're now living in a certain reality, and therefore, we have to look at GATE. We have to look at it and determine whether we need to make some adjustments so that GATE will be targeted to those who need it the most. You'll have heard stories of GATE 10 years ago. Let me go back 10 years. Where persons in their twilight years, people in their 60s, who already had 3 and 4 degrees, going on to do a degree at age 65, using GATE, okay, and doing another discipline entirely, you know, your economists doing law and all that sort of thing. So it was good for the country because it developed our, as I said, our intellectual capacity and developed our professional capacity. But we have to look at that. You know, no decision has been taken. In fact, we're actually looking at a decision now to try and help a particular group of people who, at the lower end of the spectrum, who need to get access to assistance for tertiary education.
And that in addition to what we have said on these, we cannot close our eyes to the initial rates and the amount of research that was experienced between the people that drop out of program and not utilizing the funds as it was intended. In addition to the fact that the direct contribution pays 80% of the tuition fee, so the student is only paying 13%. We also have to consider that we have students accessing scholarships and not bursaries. So for 2020, we would have had the 100 scholarships being awarded and 423 bursaries. 500 bursaries are available. 423 bursaries were awarded in 2020. So in addition to the assistance to 400 students, which obtained up to 2019. In 2020, you now had 523 persons benefiting from that direct intervention with respect to scholarships and bursaries. And that accounts for another at least $150 million per year. So, you know, we're adding the direct contribution to the university, we're adding what happens with GATE, we're adding also what happens with scholarships and bursaries. And for this year, we've had 372 applicants based on the 2021 examinations. And as obtained last year, we may very well open again because we have space for 500. So, again, so that's further expenditure and investment by the government into the education of our citizens at the tertiary level.
Minister, you chaired the grants committee for the last 3 years and the capacity as a finance minister as well. Are you in a position to state how you would have found the financial operations of UE to be? Are you satisfied with how it had been operating?
Actually, that's a very contentious subject. And we're not talking UE St. Augustine. We're talking the university. And in fact, that is the subject of a lot of confusion within the university right now, because there was a report that indicated, more or less, these are my words now, that the UE had sort of overextended itself in terms of its growth. So it's grown to become a huge organization. But in doing that, in growing at such a rapid pace, it outgrew its ability to finance itself. So that I can see that in that committee, I can see the problems that resulted from that. You know, some people would say very laudable, noble ideal to become one of the best universities in the world, one of the largest universities in the world, etc., which is the path they were on. But what happened is that they didn't have the capacity to finance it.
Minister, Chancellor, on that same issue, from your vantage point, what are some of the immediate areas you think that should be addressed to deal with the growth of UE?
That is not something that we are going to figure out. The way we're going to deal with this is that we have a lump sum of money that we can afford out of the national budget, and the university will have to decide how to fit inside of that. We can't tell them what to do. We can't tell them what programs to put on, what departments to focus on. Of course, we have national development goals that's published. The national development needs, the areas where we need people to study and improve themselves. That's known. But we can't tell university what course to put on, what course not to put on, and so on. What we can tell them is this: the amount of money that can be made available to you. Because there's so many competing demands for money. I want to stress that. There are competing demands for money everywhere, as you will have seen in the recent weeks and so on.
And let me just add that a number of the campuses, this is not a UE St. Augustine issue, this is a UE regional issue. And a number of the campuses are running deficit budgets for a number of years. UE St. Augustine has actually been quite reasonable in adjusting to suit. But because we have had, as a government, to reduce the funding, that would put them in a position where they would be in a deficit for 2021-22. And so their proposal was to bring them out of that deficit. But considering the impact on the country has been through a very harrowing time. At this point, we would want them to focus on restricting, looking at where they can restrict their expenditure and their recurrent expenditure, rather than at this point transferring it to the student. So that whole operation is what UE has to do, looking closely at their offerings and seeing how they can reduce their expenditure.
Mr. Mbwit, have you identified, again, from your vantage point, any redundancies in the operations of the...
You see, we don't want to be too intrusive. Again, we don't want to tell them exactly what they should do. And this applies to everybody. You know, whatever agency gets funding from the government, whether it's a ministry, whether it's a state enterprise like WASA, a statutory authority, there's only so much funding the government can make available to all of these competing demands. The university is a very sophisticated organization. So once they know how much money is available, they have to make the adjustments. We're not going to tell them what to do.
According to you, using close to $1 billion. You said about 700 million.
Approximately 700 is what we contribute as a government, as a country. Taxpayers contribute approximately 700 million towards tertiary education at UWI. So it's 500 million direct contribution, more or less, and 200 million in gate associated with the UE students. Well, and the minister also spoke about scholarships, but that is not UWI. That some of them will be UA, some will be abroad, that sort of thing.
Are we getting value for money?
That again is something I would not want to comment on at this point in time.
Minister, in terms of the discussions for when the institution is to look at the courses that come back with its revised listing, has a time frame been given for that?
Well, they have to look at it immediately. I mean, the time is upon us.
And they've started to submit information already. They've submitted all their courses and the enrollment in those courses. They've submitted their business plan for one of the ventures they would like the government to support them in, the Global Medical School. And there's some other information that they need to submit with regards to lecturers and the kind of course loads. And so there's some other information that's coming that they are compiling at this time. So they are moving with alacrity as prodded by the committee because we need this information very quickly.
In response to a question my colleague had asked earlier, and he said you can't say what courses we should cut, but you can't say how much the government is willing to spend. What figure is that?
We have asked them to look at a 10% reduction. And that is in the direct contribution.
That's in $500 million.
I think it's 517 million. And we've asked them to look at a 10% reduction from $517 million.
And that will be sufficient, at least to...
Well, that's what we can afford. I mean, as I said, we have to... You see, let me change the subject slightly. Every month, the Ministry of Finance has to find almost $200 million to subsidize WASA. You heard the number I said. Almost $200 million. So that when you do a budget, you have to look at all of these competing demands and figure out how much you can apportion to a particular activity. So we have asked them to reduce by about 10%. Hopefully they can. We don't want them to put it on the students. So we've asked them to go back and revisit their expenditure. And we hope they'll come back quickly.
To put it on the students this academic year, what about next year?
Well, that will take care of itself next year. You know, everybody has to understand the situation that we are in. One of the points the student guild made, and I'm subject to correction, Minister Gatsby Dolly was in the meeting, is that this has come at them a bit too quickly. You know, they need to internalize it, they need to understand it, they need to get, you know, accustomed to it, and therefore they don't want to get involved in a fee adjustment this year. But obviously implied in that is that they will have a whole year to look at the pros and cons of a fee adjustment in due course. But there's no decision on that.
And just to make the point that the student guilds across the region usually collaborate with the executives in the different campuses. And so there's been agreement, you know, so there's precedent for agreement for fee increases as is usual in the other campuses. So I don't think the student guild is so much opposed to the idea of an increase, understanding the circumstances, but it is the type of increase and when it happens. So just as Minister Imbut said, that discussion has to take place, and we have a year to have this discussion take place with the data that is required so that we can see from both ends what the university can do, and barring that, you know, what type of increase can be considered for next academic year if it comes to that. But no decisions have been taken.
And we can move away from you for just a bit.
Just a few. Now, you know you are famous for one more question. Not so, Jensen?
I won't.
You know you're famous for that, eh? And you have at least 10, one more questions, okay? So let's try and keep it tight. Please, thank you very much.
Okay, I'll be very, very short. I'll start with, actually I'll go with Mrs. Dolly. There was a report in today's Express of a student threatening to shoot up a school in Tobago. Have you received any information on this? And if so, what is the next step for the student? I understand he was removed from writing the CSEC math. Would he be allowed to sit it, well, let's say, with the other students who may have had COVID and could not have sat?
As you would know, there's a Secretary for Education in Tobago, so they would have direct control of the situation there. I am aware of the situation, and I know that they will be handling it in the best way possible.
And so on that note, right, I knew that there would have been an interministerial...
Can I just preempt to say that we have an update press conference tomorrow, Ministry of Education, so we'll have personnel to answer all of these types of questions tomorrow. So if we could just hold the fire for one day, we would be able to deal more fully with those questions tomorrow.
No problem.
Let's say with one of the hot topics now is dealing with TSTT. Has the government met with the board of Cable and Wireless to discuss any plans of selling TSTT shares?
Well, I saw that in the public domain, and you know, there are stories in the public domain, quite frankly, that astonish me. The former administration, we're talking about the UNC government, had commissioned a team to sell Cable and Wireless's shares in TSTT. When I became the Minister of Finance, I met that proposal, and I met the team that was set up by the UNC to sell Cable and Wireless's shares in TSTT. So that is an initiative of the UNC that somehow, now 7 years later, memories have disappeared, and it is now an initiative of the PNM. That's not true. What happened was, Cable and Wireless got involved with another telecommunications company, which has changed its name. I think it became Columbus Communications, and now it has some other name. So that the Telecommunications Authority, and this is not under this government, it's under another government, told Cable and Wireless, you can't be in two telecommunications providers. You have to be in one. So that what Cable and Wireless was required to do by the former government, not by us, was to give the voting rights for their shares to NEL. And the effort then continued to try and dispose of the Cable and Wireless shares. The problem with that is that the amount of money that Cable and Wireless would like to get for the shares, nobody in the market was willing to pay that amount before us, before we came in, and nobody in the market is willing to pay that now. So that thing has been stalled for quite a while. But I just want to reiterate The idea of selling cable and wireless shares came from two reasons. One, they got involved with another telecom provider, and therefore they were told by the telecom authority that they have to get out of TSTT decision making. They still have the shares, but they have to get out of the decision making. And two, the former UNC government set up a team to sell those cable and wireless shares.
The government of today would not be looking at that.
Well, the problem is really cable and wireless's problem, because they can't be involved with two providers. They can't be TSTT and also the other one, the other provider. That is just out of the question. So it is not a question of a decision on the part of anybody. It is the telecom authority applying the law and saying that you as an entity cannot be the controller or the major shareholder of two telecommunications providers. I hope you understand the logic. So it is not up to the government to say that the shares should be sold or not sold. That was a decision of the Telecommunications Authority, which is an independent body. Okay?
Last week, Friday, the unions held a march in Port of Spain.
Before we go ahead, Jensen, how many more questions do you have?
I have two more listed.
Okay, could we stick to that?
Yeah.
Right, so go ahead.
But it depends on the answer.
No, go ahead, Jensen. Let's stick to the two, okay?
Right. One of the considerations leading up to that was the possibility of borrowing to increase wages and payback. Any consideration given to that?
You need to clarify who borrowing what to do what?
Borrowing to pay increase wages, and back pay. That's one of the suggestions coming out of the unions and then.
Well, whatever back pay that has to be paid, we'll have to borrow. And again, I want to stress that point. We are running a deficit budget. We have been running a deficit budget in Trinidad and Tobago now for the last, since 2009, as far as I can recall. So if you take all those years together, 12, 13 years, the government of Trinidad and Tobago has been running a deficit budget. Since the crash, the global financial crisis of 2007, 2008, I don't know if you were around then, but oil crashed to $35 from $150 to $35 during that 2007, 2008 period. The global financial system crashed. The government had to go, of the day, I was in that government, had to go and reduce the budget, cut the budget, and then began to run a deficit budget. In a deficit budget, your expenditure is more than your revenue. Your expenditure is more than your income. You make up the difference, which is called a deficit, by borrowing. So we've been borrowing, the country, the government of this country, from 2009 to now, has been borrowing money to make up the difference between expenditure and income. And therefore, any back pay that comes out of this settlement, we will have to borrow that, because we are already running a budget deficit this year. We started off with a projection of about 9 billion. It may be 7 billion at the end of the day, but we still will have to spend 7 billion more than we earn. And if back pay has to be paid, 1 billion, 2 billion, whatever, it's going to be a large number, we will have to borrow that. So I just want you to understand the paradigm. There's no pot of money that we could just put our hand, dip our hand in and pull out the back pay. Because we are running a deficit budget, and because that back pay will go as an expenditure item, it will increase the amount of government expenditure, and therefore will have to be borrowed because we run a deficit budget. Okay?
Just for clarity, the context was to pay more than the 2%, and the government was...
No, just even to pay the 2%. You're talking a significant amount of back pay, maybe 700 million, maybe 1 billion, that would have to be borrowed, even that 2%.
And that leads me to my final question. Does the government have a position on the 2%? Is that the ceiling?
Now, that is your final question?
It depends on your answer.
No, Jensen. It will be your final question. As I've indicated earlier, we don't negotiate in public. you will have seen in the public domain, and I've seen it in your newspaper, that the chief personnel officer has announced that he's reconvening or resuming the wage negotiations with the public sector unions in this month of June. And in fact, he sent out a schedule with all the dates, with all the unions he's meeting with, and the days on which he'll be meeting with them, and the negotiations continue. I just want to make it clear the offer was an initial offer. It's a negotiation. The trade unions came with their initial request. The CPO made his initial offer. Negotiations continue. But we're not going to negotiate in public. But I want to stress that was the initial offer. Okay? Thank you very much. Sure.
Right?
Sure.
I know neither yourself nor Minister Gaspidoli were part of a cabinet subcommittee that would have been tasked to look into the operations of TSTT. But were the findings discussed at a cabinet level in terms of that subcommittee?
All right, well, there are two problems with that question. One, we don't indicate what was discussed at cabinet. Two, Minister Robinson Regis is the chairman of that committee, but I can tell you that the purpose of the committee is fact-finding. So the committee has met with the union, committee has met with the company, the committee is also getting information from other areas. The purpose of the committee is to look at the future of the company, the government's involvement in the company, technology, and things like that. Okay? So that committee is still alive, and I suggest you ask the chairman of that committee, who is not me, is Minister Robinson Regis, for any updates that the chairman may wish to give you. Okay? Thank you very much.